Someone's out there, and they need help. Evelyn whispered to herself as the wind whipped around the edges of her small cabin, rattling the wooden shutters with relentless force. The snow was coming down in thick, heavy flakes, coating the thin path that led from the forest to her door in a blanket of white, making every step a soft crunch beneath her worn boots. She hadn't expected anyone to visit her tonight. Not in this storm, not in Frost Hollow, where the world felt frozen and isolated, and yet the sound of movement just beyond her porch tugged at her instincts. She opened the door slowly, leaning on the cold wood, letting her hands feel the shapes beyond her sight, and there it was, a large, dark form pressed against the porch, trembling, its ragged breathing echoing through the howl of the wind. Evelyn's heart skipped, a surge of adrenaline and concern mingling together. She reached for her cloak and wrapped it around herself, her fingers brushing against the creature's fur as she guided it carefully into the warmth of her home. The fire sputtered as she added another log, throwing shadows that danced across the room, revealing glimpses of her simple furnishings, a table with a few bowls, a cot pushed to the wall, and the herbs drying above the hearth. Every movement was measured, every step cautious, because she knew how easily a startled animal could panic, and yet this one remained still, trusting, or perhaps desperate. She felt the pulse of life under her hands, the uneven rhythm of breaths and the heat of its body, and her chest tightened with empathy. Evelyn gathered soft blankets, wrapping the creature gently, speaking to it in low tones, telling it that it was safe here, that it could rest, that no one would hurt it tonight. Outside, the wind shrieked, carrying flakes that cut against the windows, but inside, the room smelled of pine and warmth, of drying herbs and the faint tang of the creature's scent, a mix of musk and wet earth. She moved around with practiced care, feeling each limb, checking for injuries, applying poultices she had made from willow bark and lavender, her hands steady even when her mind raced with questions. Who was this? How had it ended up here in the storm? And why did it feel so familiar, as if her hands had always known how to soothe it? The night stretched long, and Evelyn whispered stories of the world outside, of the small victories she had known and the times she had stumbled, of the loneliness she had endured in the heart of the wilderness. The creature's breathing softened in response, the subtle easing of tension a balm to her own anxieties. Hours passed with snow piling against the walls, the storm a relentless companion, and yet for the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt a thread of connection, a spark of purpose igniting in the quiet hum of their shared vigil. Every so often, a faint sound from the forest would make her pause, listening intently, but each time the creature would remain, nuzzling slightly against her hands as if offering thanks in the only language it knew. As midnight approached, the fire low and golden in the hearth, Evelyn sat beside it, her blind eyes closing for a moment, trusting the rhythm of its chest, the steady warmth of its body, and in that stillness, she felt a whisper of destiny stir in the depths of the room, a sense that this night, harsh as it was, held something greater than mere survival, a promise that her kindness might awaken something beyond her comprehension, something that had been waiting for her all along. Evelyn woke to the soft crackle of dying embers and the distant whistle of wind slipping through the pine trees beyond her cabin. For a moment, she remained still beneath her blanket, listening. The storm had weakened during the night, but the world outside still sounded cold and lonely. Then she heard it, a slow breath, deep, steady, close enough that she could almost feel it. A small smile touched her lips. The wolf was still there. She sat up carefully and stretched her hands toward the warmth of the hearth. The familiar ache in her shoulders reminded her how little sleep she had gotten. She had spent most of the night tending to her unexpected guest, replacing cold cloths, checking its condition, and whispering gentle reassurances whenever its breathing became uneven. Most people in Frost Hollow would have called her foolish. They already believed she was too soft for her own good, too trusting, too willing to help creatures and people who never returned the favor. But Evelyn had long ago learned that kindness was not a weakness. It was the only thing that had carried her through the darker seasons of her life. She pushed herself to her feet and moved carefully through the cabin. Her fingers traced familiar surfaces, the edge of the table, the back of a chair, the shelf where her dried herbs hung in neat bundles. Every object existed in a map, she carried inside her mind. She reached for a kettle and filled it with water before placing it above the fire. Soon the scent of mint leaves and wild honey drifted through the room. The wolf stirred. Evelyn turned toward the sound immediately. Its breathing had changed. Stronger now. More alert. She smiled. "Good morning," she said softly. "I know you cannot answer, but I think you are feeling better." The wolf released a low sound that was almost thoughtful. Not a growl. Not a warning. Something gentler. As if it understood. Evelyn knelt beside it and carefully checked the bandages she had wrapped around its injuries. Her fingertips brushed through thick fur that felt surprisingly soft despite everything it had endured. The animal remained completely still beneath her touch. That alone was unusual. Most wild creatures were nervous around strangers. This one seemed almost comforted by her presence. Outside, the morning slowly brightened behind a veil of clouds. Somewhere in the distance, church bells from the village rang faintly through the cold air. Evelyn listened to them with a small sigh. Frost Hollow would already be awake. Merchants opening shops, families gathering for breakfast, children racing through snow-covered streets. And none of them would be thinking about her. That realization no longer hurt as much as it once had, but some wounds never disappeared entirely. The wolf shifted closer. Evelyn froze. Then she felt something warm brush lightly against her hand. Its nose. The gesture was so unexpected that she laughed softly. "You must be hungry." She stood and gathered what little food she had left. Some dried venison, a few pieces of bread, and water. It was not much, but she offered it willingly. The wolf accepted without hesitation. As the morning passed, an unusual peace settled over the cabin. The storm had left the world quiet. The fire crackled. The kettle steamed. The wolf rested nearby. For the first time in years, Evelyn did not feel alone. What she did not know was that far beyond Frost Hollow, riders were already searching every road, every forest trail, and every mountain pass. Their king had vanished during the storm, and with every passing hour, the entire kingdom was becoming more desperate to find him. Evelyn spent the morning moving quietly around the cabin, making sure the wolf had clean water and a comfortable place to rest. She hummed softly as she adjusted the blankets, the sound of her voice blending with the faint crackle of the fire, creating a rhythm that seemed to soothe both her and the creature beside her. She remembered the small loaf of bread she had hidden in the corner of the pantry and carefully tore it into pieces, offering them one by one. The wolf accepted each piece with gentle patience, never showing a hint of impatience or fear. Evelyn noticed the way its ears twitched at every sound outside, every shift of the wind and distant bird call, and she felt a pang of understanding. She knew what it was like to be vulnerable in a world that seemed indifferent to her existence. Her own blindness had made her rely on senses that others often ignored, and now she could feel the same acute awareness mirrored in the wolf. It had its own intelligence, its own way of sensing the room and its new companion. As she moved closer to tend to its fur, she felt the subtle warmth radiating from its body, the way it shifted slightly to nuzzle her hand as if to communicate gratitude. Evelyn smiled, feeling a quiet satisfaction. She had spent years learning how to care for creatures that others dismissed, and this one had accepted her touch without hesitation. Time passed in this delicate balance, and the storm outside began to wane, the wind less fierce and the snow settling into a soft, unbroken carpet across the landscape. Evelyn could hear the distant calls of birds returning to the trees and the faint rustle of small animals venturing back into the underbrush. She leaned back against the wall and let herself take a moment to breathe, feeling the calm that had settled over the cabin. The wolf shifted again, moving closer to her, and Evelyn instinctively placed her hand on its back, feeling the rise and fall of its chest in rhythm with its breathing. It was as though they had formed an unspoken bond over the course of the night, a connection forged in trust and quiet understanding. She thought of the people in the nearby village, bustling about their morning routines, oblivious to the events that had unfolded here, and she realized that this small act of care had brought a sense of purpose that she had not felt in a long time. Evelyn adjusted the blankets again, tucking them more securely around the wolf, and she spoke softly, telling it that it was safe, that no harm would come while she was here. The wolf responded with a gentle exhale, a small sound that felt like an acknowledgement. Evelyn settled on the floor beside it, feeling the warmth of the fire and the steady presence of her companion, and she allowed herself to relax into the quiet intimacy of the moment. Outside, the world began to glow with the soft light of morning. But within the cabin, the air was warm and still, filled with the comforting rhythm of two beings who had found each other in the midst of a storm, each offering solace and companionship without words, building a fragile sense of trust that promised to carry them through whatever lay ahead. By late afternoon, the cabin had grown so quiet that Evelyn could hear every tiny sound around her. The faint pop of sap inside the burning logs, the soft brushing of tree branches against the outer wall, the slow breathing of the wolf resting only a few feet away. She sat near the hearth with a basket of dried herbs in her lap, separating leaves by touch alone. Her fingers moved automatically through the task she had performed hundreds of times before, but her attention kept drifting toward her unusual guest. There was something different about him. The realization had been growing stronger throughout the day. Most injured animals remained fearful, especially around strangers. They paced. They startled easily. They tried to leave the moment they recovered enough strength. This wolf did none of those things. Instead, he remained close, watching, listening, almost as though he understood every word she spoke. Evelyn smiled faintly and shook her head at the thought. "You are probably tired of hearing my voice by now," she said softly. The wolf responded immediately with a low rumble from somewhere deep in his chest. It was not threatening. If anything, it sounded amused. Evelyn laughed quietly. "I will take that as a no." The sound seemed to make the room warmer somehow. She could not remember the last time she had laughed with someone. Or something. Most people in Frost Hollow avoided her unless they needed medicine or healing herbs. They were polite enough, but distance lingered beneath every interaction. Some pitied her blindness. Others simply did not know what to say. Over time, she had learned not to expect company. Yet somehow this silent creature had filled her lonely cabin with a presence she could not explain. Across the room, the wolf lifted his head. His silver eyes followed every movement she made. Alpha King Lucian Blackwood had faced council meetings, border disputes, political schemes, and challenges from powerful leaders across the kingdom. None of those experiences had unsettled him the way this small cabin did. For years, people had approached him because of his crown, his authority, his reputation. Even kindness often carried hidden expectations. But Evelyn knew none of that. She had welcomed him without questions, protected him without hesitation, shared her food despite having very little herself. And she had done it believing he was nothing more than an injured animal. Lucian found himself listening whenever she spoke, memorizing the sound of her voice, watching the way she navigated her world with quiet determination. There was strength in her that no title could create, a strength that came from surviving disappointment without allowing it to harden her heart. Outside, the daylight slowly faded. Frost Hollow settled. Beneath another blanket of snow, as evening approached, Evelyn rose to prepare supper. As she moved toward the pantry, her foot caught against the edge of a chair that had shifted slightly earlier in the day. Before she could stumble, the wolf was suddenly beside her. She froze. A warm shoulder pressed gently against her side, steadying her balance. For several seconds, neither moved. Evelyn blinked in surprise. Then her hand slowly found the thick fur beside her. "You caught me," she whispered. The wolf remained still. Her fingers rested lightly against his neck. A strange feeling passed through her chest. Comfort, safety, familiarity. Feelings she had not expected to find in the company of a stranger from the forest. Outside, night descended across the kingdom. Miles away, royal riders continued searching roads and mountain trails. Messages traveled between distant territories. Concern grew with every passing hour. But inside the small cabin at the edge of Frost Hollow, neither Evelyn nor the wolf seemed eager for the day to end. And for the first time in a very long time, Alpha King Lucian Blackwood found himself wishing the search would take just a little longer. The following morning arrived beneath a pale gray sky. The storm had passed completely, leaving Frost Hollow buried under fresh snow that reflected what little sunlight pushed through the clouds. Evelyn was preparing tea when the wolf suddenly lifted his head. The movement was so abrupt that she immediately noticed it. His breathing changed. His muscles tightened beneath his dark fur. He was listening to something far away. Evelyn paused. At first, she heard nothing beyond the ordinary sounds of winter. Then, faintly, the distant crunch of boots over snow reached her ears. More than one person. Several. Moving steadily toward the cabin. The wolf rose to his feet. Evelyn could feel the tension radiating from him. "What is it?" she asked softly. The wolf stepped closer to the door. His attention remained fixed on the approaching sounds. Evelyn set down her cup and moved carefully across the room. The visitors were still several hundred feet away, but they were coming directly toward her home. That alone was unusual. Few people ever made the trip unless they needed medicine. A knot of unease formed in her stomach. Outside, the footsteps grew louder. Voices followed. Men. Serious voices. Searching voices. The wolf released a low sound deep within his chest. Evelyn reached out and rested a hand against his shoulder. "It is all right," she whispered, though she was no longer certain of that herself. A few moments later, a firm knock echoed through the cabin. The sound made the room feel suddenly smaller. Evelyn drew a slow breath and walked toward the door. Before opening it, she glanced instinctively toward the wolf even though she could not see him. He had moved silently toward the far side of the room. Hidden. Waiting. Evelyn opened the door. Cold air rushed inside. 3 men stood on her porch. Their heavy coats carried traces of snow and long travel. "Miss Carter," one of them asked. Evelyn nodded. "Yes." The man hesitated briefly. "We are looking for a large black wolf that may have passed through this area during the storm." Evelyn's heart skipped. Behind her, the cabin remained silent. The men continued. Several witnesses reported unusual tracks leading toward the northern woods. "We have reason to believe the animal may be injured." Evelyn lowered her gaze. Every instinct told her to step aside and tell the truth. These men sounded official. Important. But another thought pushed through her uncertainty. She remembered the wolf arriving alone in the storm. She remembered his exhaustion, his trust, the way he had remained beside her. The answer came before she could overthink it. "No," she said quietly. "I have not seen any wolf." The lie surprised even her. For a moment nobody spoke. The men exchanged brief glances. "If you do see anything unusual, please send word to the village immediately." "I will," Evelyn replied. Eventually the footsteps retreated. The sounds faded into the distance. Only after several long minutes did she close the door completely. The cabin fell silent once more. Evelyn leaned against the wood and released a shaky breath. She had never lied so easily before. Slowly, she turned toward the center of the room. The wolf emerged from the shadows. Neither moved for several seconds. Then he approached her. A warm nose brushed lightly against her hand. Evelyn smiled despite herself. "You are causing me trouble already." The wolf remained close. And although she did not know it yet, somewhere beyond Frost Hollow, an entire kingdom was growing increasingly desperate. Because the men who had just left her cabin were not hunters searching for a lost animal. They were royal guards searching for their missing king. That night, Evelyn fell asleep in the chair beside the fire. The cabin had grown quiet again after the visit from the guards, but her thoughts remained restless. She kept wondering why strangers would travel so far through winter weather searching for a single wolf. None of it made sense. Yet every time uncertainty crept into her mind, she felt the steady presence of the creature nearby and found herself calming once more. Sometime before dawn, exhaustion finally claimed her. The fire burned low. Snow drifted softly beyond the windows. Silence settled over the cabin. When Evelyn opened her eyes again, the first pale light of morning was filtering through the curtains. For several seconds she remained still, enjoying the warmth beneath her blanket. Then she frowned. Something felt different. The cabin sounded different. She listened carefully. No steady breathing near the hearth. No faint rustle of fur against blankets. No familiar presence occupying the space beside the fire. Her heart tightened. "Hello," she called softly. No response came. Evelyn sat upright immediately. "Are you there?" Still nothing. Concern replaced sleepiness. She rose from her chair and moved carefully across the room. Her hand found the blankets where the wolf had been resting. They were empty. Cold. The realization struck harder than she expected. He was gone. Of course he was gone. Wolves belonged in forests, not cabins. He had recovered. He had left. Yet the sudden emptiness made the room feel larger and lonelier than before. Evelyn lowered her head and tried to ignore the disappointment growing inside her chest. She had known him for barely 2 days. Why should it matter? Why did it feel as though she had lost something important? Then another sound reached her ears. Not from the fireplace. Not from the door. From across the room, a slow, steady breath. Human. Evelyn froze. Every muscle in her body tightened. She listened again. The sound came from the old wooden chair near the window. Someone was there. Someone she had not heard enter. Her pulse quickened. "Who is in my house?" she asked. Silence followed. Then a calm voice answered. Deep. Smooth. Unfamiliar. "You are awake." Evelyn stepped backward instinctively. The voice was unlike any she had ever heard. Controlled. Powerful. Yet strangely gentle. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man was quiet for a moment before speaking again. "The better question is whether you are afraid." Evelyn lifted her chin. "Should I be?" A faint sound followed. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a sigh. No. Something in that answer settled her nerves despite every reason it should not have. The stranger continued. "You brought me into your home. You cared for me when you had no reason to. You protected me when others came searching." Evelyn's confusion deepened. The words felt oddly familiar. Then realization slowly began to form. Her breath caught. The wolf. Another pause. Yes. The room seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Her mind struggled to connect the pieces. The injured creature. The stranger. The impossible explanation standing between them. Evelyn swallowed hard. "That is not possible. I imagine it sounds impossible." The man rose from his chair. She heard the movement clearly now. Strong. Confident. Nothing like someone recovering from injury. Then he took a step closer. "My name is Lucian Blackwood." The name struck like thunder. Every child in the kingdom knew that name. Every village. Every town. Every pack. Evelyn's heart stopped. Because standing inside her small cabin was not a traveler. Not a stranger. Not even an ordinary wolf. Standing before her was the Alpha King. Evelyn froze in place. Her hand lingering on the edge of the table as her mind tried to reconcile the presence of the Alpha King in her small, humble cabin. Every story she had ever heard about him spoke of authority, decisiveness, and an aura that commanded obedience from everyone around him. Yet here he stood, eyes fixed on her with a calm that contrasted sharply with the stories, and for the first time, she noticed the subtle warmth behind those piercing silver eyes. Her pulse quickened. She wanted to step back, to put distance between herself and this man who was both the king of the realm and the wolf she had cared for without realizing. But something held her in place. Perhaps it was the recognition in his gaze, a spark that suggested he knew her actions had been deliberate, meaningful, and entirely without expectation of reward. Lucian studied her silently for a moment that stretched longer than any minute should. Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat dry, her hands instinctively moving to rest near her lap. "Your guards," she said quietly, finding her voice. "They will be coming soon. You should not be here." Lucian inclined his head slightly, the movement deliberate, measured. "I am aware," he said, his voice low, rich, carrying the weight of command. "And?" she prompted, the question barely audible. He stepped closer, each movement precise, his presence filling the room in a way that made the walls seem smaller. "And I am not leaving," he stated simply. Evelyn felt a rush of emotions she could not name. Relief, anxiety, a strange flutter of curiosity. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought that he had chosen to remain simply because of her. Yet there was a softness there too, a quiet acknowledgement of the care she had offered without expectation, the way she had tended to his needs without even knowing who he truly was. She could feel the intensity of his gaze following her every motion as she moved toward the window, peering out at the silent snow-covered forest. The world outside seemed calm, oblivious to the presence of a king within these four walls. "You should leave," she repeated, her voice firmer this time, more certain, hoping to assert some control over the overwhelming reality. Lucian did not respond immediately. He simply observed her, and the silence stretched, filled with unspoken understanding. Finally, he moved slightly to the side, allowing her to see the way the light caught his features, highlighting the strength in his jaw, the sharpness of his cheekbones, the unwavering steadiness of his posture. "I do not want to," he said, the words carrying weight, certainty, and an unspoken promise. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. She did not know what would come next. She could not predict the hours that would follow, the choices they would make, or the paths their connection might create. But one thing was clear. In that moment, the Alpha King had decided that he would remain, and nothing she could do or say would change that. The cabin felt alive with possibility, the quiet hum of fate settling into place, and Evelyn realized that the small, fragile bond she had formed with the creature she had sheltered was no longer fragile at all. It had awakened something powerful, something that neither distance, authority, nor circumstance could undo, and she felt, deep within, the first true hint that her actions had set the course of something far greater than herself. The fragile peace inside the cabin lasted only a few hours. By midday, the distant sound of approaching voices drifted through the cold winter air. This time there were far more people than before. Evelyn stood near the table, immediately recognizing the tension in the atmosphere. Outside, boots crunched across packed snow. Doors opened and closed in the distance. Neighbors were gathering. Something unusual was happening. Lucian had gone quiet the moment the sounds began. He stood near the window, his posture calm, yet there was a watchfulness about him that made the room feel charged with anticipation. Evelyn tightened her fingers around the edge of the table. "More visitors?" she asked. "Yes," Lucian replied simply. The answer did little to ease her concern. A few moments later, a loud knock echoed against the front door. Then another, not impatient, demanding. Evelyn took a breath and moved forward. Before she could reach the door, Lucian spoke. "Let me." The calm authority in his voice made her pause instantly. He crossed the room and opened the door. Cold air rushed inside. Outside stood nearly a dozen people. Village elders, merchants, farmers, several of the guards who had visited before. At the center of them all stood Harold Grayson, Frost Hollow's senior elder. The old man rarely visited anyone personally. The fact that he had come here told Evelyn everything she needed to know. The situation was serious. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Then Harold cleared his throat. "Miss Carter," he began carefully. "We received reports that royal guards were seen entering this area yesterday." Evelyn stepped closer. "They were searching for someone." Murmurs spread through the crowd. "And did they find who they were looking for?" another villager asked. Before Evelyn could answer, Lucian stepped forward. The movement alone silenced everyone. Something changed instantly. The air itself seemed to freeze. Evelyn could not see the faces around her, but she heard the reaction. Sharp intakes of breath. Sudden silence. The scrape of boots against snow. Then someone whispered a single name. "Blackwood." Another voice followed. "It cannot be." Evelyn frowned in confusion. What was happening? Then, one by one, the sounds began. Boots shifting, bodies lowering, knees touching snow. Across the clearing, every voice disappeared. The entire crowd had dropped into respectful silence. Evelyn's heart raced. "What are they doing?" she whispered. Nobody answered her. Nobody except Lucian. His voice remained calm, steady, unshaken. "They are acknowledging their king." A wave of realization crashed through her all over again. This was real, not a dream, not a misunderstanding. The man she had sheltered beside her fireplace was truly the Alpha King. Elder Harold finally found his voice. "Your Majesty." The words trembled slightly. "We did not know." "Clearly," Lucian replied. "No anger, no judgment, just certainty." Another villager spoke nervously. "Miss Carter never told us." Lucian's expression hardened slightly. "Because she did not know." Silence followed. Then he continued. "She offered shelter when others would have turned away. She gave assistance without asking for reward. She protected someone she believed was helpless." Evelyn lowered her head, overwhelmed by the attention. All her life, she had existed quietly at the edge of Frost Hollow. Forgotten, overlooked, pitted. Yet now an entire crowd stood silent because of words spoken in her defense. For the first time, nobody was looking at her blindness. Nobody was whispering about her limitations. In that moment, they saw her exactly as Lucian saw her. And somehow that changed everything. The crowd remained gathered outside the cabin long after the shock had settled over Frost Hollow. Snow drifted lazily from the gray sky, softening the edges of the village and muting every sound except the occasional whisper. Evelyn stood near the doorway, still struggling to process everything that had happened. For years, she had lived quietly on the edge of the community, expecting nothing more than another ordinary winter. Now the entire village stood outside her home because the Alpha King had chosen to remain there. Eventually, the royal guards stepped forward. Unlike the villagers, they showed no surprise, only relief. Their leader bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, the kingdom has been searching for you without rest." The council awaits your return. Lucian listened without interruption. I am aware, he replied. The carriage is prepared. We can leave immediately. Silence followed. The guards clearly expected him to walk away. The villagers expected it too. Even Evelyn expected it. After all, kings belonged in palaces. Leaders belonged among councils and nobles. Surely this strange chapter was ending. Evelyn lowered her gaze and folded her hands together. A part of her felt relieved. Life could return to normal. The confusion would disappear. The attention would fade. Yet another part of her felt an unexpected sadness growing inside her chest. She had known Lucian only a few days, but his presence had changed the rhythm of her quiet life. The cabin would feel empty without him. Lucian glanced toward her. Then he looked back at his guards. Not today, he said. The statement was so unexpected that nobody spoke. Even the wind seemed to pause. The captain blinked. Your Majesty? I said not today. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Evelyn stared in confusion. The captain carefully chose his next words. The kingdom requires your presence. The kingdom survived before I arrived, and it will survive one more day. The answer left no room for argument. The guards exchanged uncertain looks, but remained silent. Lucian had made his decision. He turned toward Evelyn. Would you like to take a walk? The question caught her completely off guard. A walk. The snow has stopped. It seems a shame to spend the entire day indoors. A few villagers gasped quietly. The Alpha King was asking the blind Omega to walk beside him. Not as a duty, not as an order, as a choice. Evelyn felt heat rise to her cheeks. I suppose that would be nice. A faint smile appeared in Lucian's voice. Good. An hour later they walked slowly through the pine-covered hills beyond Frost Hollow. Evelyn listened to the sounds of birds moving through the branches overhead, while Lucian guided her along the safest path. For the first time in years, she felt no need to hurry. No need to hide. The silence between them was comfortable. Easy. Somewhere along the trail, Evelyn finally spoke. Why are you staying? Lucian answered immediately. Because for the first time in a very long time, I found a place where nobody wanted anything from me. Evelyn's breath caught. The words felt honest. Real. He continued walking beside her. You saw an injured wolf. Nothing more. You offered kindness without expecting reward. The winter breeze moved gently through the trees around them. Evelyn lowered her head, smiling softly. Above them, pale sunlight finally broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Neither of them knew what the future would bring. A king and an Omega from opposite worlds should never have crossed paths. Yet destiny rarely asked permission. And as they continued walking side by side through the quiet snow, neither realized that what began as one night of shelter had become the beginning of a story neither of them would ever be able to leave behind.